Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, how many of us, after doing a demo, actually sit down and watch the game tape and review it and look at what we did well and where is there an opportunity to improve? And I would say not many of us do this. And I had the chance to sit down with Chief Storyteller Nick Capozzi of Demostack. And he shared so many tactics, so many techniques, and a lot of them are derived from what he spent 10 plus years working on a cruise ship. And you might think, well, how does that relate to B2B sales? And he draws so many parallels of really holding an audience's attention, engaging them, but keeping that engagement, especially when you have a diverse audience. He had, complete multiculturalism. He had people with different needs, different budgets. And so it really is the same in B2B. Gartner says there's up to 11 people now making a decision. How can we drive consensus? How can we get our audience leaning in? How can we engage it? A lot of it's storytelling. And really, when you break down storytelling, enunciation, articulation, are we using our hands? Are we pausing? Are we speeding up sometimes to really get them excited about what's going to happen next? Are we slowing down to really create that momentum? And to do this, we have to be very intentional. And oftentimes when we're on these demos, we're just thinking about ourselves and we're looking inward, and it's just whatever comes out, comes out. And your prospect feels that. And, you're no different than anybody else at that point. So how can we really prepare? And he mentioned a lot about that practice so that we are intentional. We're showing up different. We're customer focused. We're ensuring that everyone's on the same page, that whatever we're sharing, that it's resonating with them. How do we know? We're asking them. We're tying it back to the problems they shared. So at the end of the call, we're moving forward. This is our one chance to actually showcase how we solve their problem. And how can we leverage story, body language, all these techniques to do that? And ultimately, create a feeling for them, like what emotionally is going to drive them or motivate them to want to move forward with your product. So great conversation. Highly encourage you to take notes, listen to it. If you're a sales leader, forward this on to your team. And I would say even for sales leaders, how can you, again, model the behavior for them? How can you show them what good looks like? Can you create a demo and record it and show them this is the framework we follow? This is where we insert storytelling. These are the stories we have so that they're prepared. They know when to insert them and really give them a playbook to follow so that they can make it their own. So it's not so rigid. It's not so robotic. But when they have that, then they can try it on. They can make it their style and they can show up as their authentic self. So highly encourage you to take a listen. I enjoyed speaking with Nick, a fellow Canadian, always nice as well. And I know you'll take tons away from this. On another note, I want to remind you that we have launched the K2 Sales Academy, which is our online sales training for both sales reps and sales leaders. We will leave a 1-week trial in the show notes. Give it a shot. Let us know what you think, if it's for you or not, and happy to answer any questions you have. So take a listen, and thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Now, many of us land into sales by accident, but how many of us can say we transitioned from a cruise ship into sales? And my guest today has done that. And I think it's a very unique experience. But first of all, welcome Nick Capozzi to the podcast.
So excited to be here with you. I'm excited. I'm so happy to talk to a fellow Canadian. I never get that opportunity anymore.
Yes, Canucks in the house. I love it. So, I've heard about your background, and we're not going to focus on that, but I just wanted to draw the parallels. And I'm just curious at the time you're, I'm sure having the time of your life on a cruise ship and you're engaging and you're meeting all these people, but, did you think that it would bring you to B2B sales now, like helping tech companies with storytelling, with demos? Did you see that correlation or that direct path in the moment, or was it kind of hindsight presented itself after the fact?
I got lucky is what happened. I was actually, I was a seller in the cruise business. For probably 98% of it, I was in sales, but it was a very B2C sale. So it was like high-end luxury duty-free, so Cartier watches and Chopard jewelry. And I wound up in the tech B2B space by accident because after I transitioned out of cruise, I just started putting content on LinkedIn about what I knew, which was presentation skills and how to keep people engaged in a sales conversation. And it was tech that kind of picked me up. And then these sales leaders started asking me, can you sit in on our demos? And I'm like, sure, I can. Now, understanding what I do about demos, I was not qualified to do that. But it's interesting how it just kind of, it happened, happenstance, frankly.
Yeah, very cool. And you mentioned the word engage there. And I think that's a huge part of demos is that the first thing is you have to engage your audience and you really have to know who you're talking about. And I feel that's missing. But what I want to do is I just want to back up for a moment. And the purpose of today is to really leverage your experience and what you do today at Demostack and just help people create an experience for their buyers that can help them and motivate them and excite them to move forward after the demo. Like, this is our chance to finally pitch and show our solution. But I see in my own practice a lot of people where they need help. So I really want to make this tactical. And I know you're going to bring a lot of tools, example, storytelling to the table. So why don't we just back it up a little bit? And, what are your thoughts on, obviously demo is important, but, the better is it that the more effective a discovery, the better the demo?
So I didn't know much truly until about 8 months ago when I started with Demostack, like how the demo should really go, because I had never been trained. I wasn't following the right people. I had never talked to a sales engineer. I didn't know what a sales engineer was. But as I dove in head first, there's two areas that I constantly get asked questions and we do workshops about. One is discovery and the other is storytelling. And I don't think if you're trying to customize a story for your prospect or persona, that you can give a great story if you don't understand their real pain points. And that comes down to really good discovery. And that's definitely a weakness. And I think that's a weakness for sellers, but it's definitely a place that sales engineers or solopreneurs understand that they need to ask really good questions, but they don't necessarily know how to do it. And I think that's one of the struggles that they'll often face.
And are you referring to good questions to get to the pain?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I would say solopreneurs, because I coach a lot of them as well, is that, they're sometimes what I feel is their self-worth is attached to it because they're not behind a big brand. And that's where stories are so magical because people want to know, like, what propelled you, what motivated you. Have a backstory that led you to launch a business. And so people want to know that because that's where that resonance and that's where they can see themselves in that before, that black and white picture. And I'm like, that's missing. So what are you seeing in terms of people that perhaps we'll kind of carve out the entrepreneurs or the solopreneurs now. What are you seeing when they do introduce storytelling? What is that doing to their brand, to their messaging, to their engagement of their audience?
It's huge if they do it right. And what I mean by that is that as a solopreneur, we get caught often in the tech, because I was a solopreneur, I've had my own businesses. We get caught up in the very technical aspects of what we do. Even if it's a creative service, if I'm offering some sort of marketing service, the reality is I still get into the technical details of what I'm doing. And I think to really tell your story as an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, a salesperson for a product, doesn't matter what, you really have to take a step back and think about who you're talking to and what is going to pull them into your realm. So when you tell a great story, what you're trying to do is pull someone in the audience across the table and make them feel they're part of your experience and part of your story. And if you do that, to answer your question, it is incredibly effective. But often I find most people, especially if they haven't been trained in this, really get bogged down in the technical details, which are important if you're talking to a technical person. But the reality is most oftentimes when we're trying to thread a deal through multiple people in a company, even if we're a solopreneur, we're trying to get in somewhere, we're often talking to a lot of different people. So how do I kind of create that memorable magic, right? Think about, how does Disney do it? Disney tells great stories. How do you Disneyfy your company?
Mm-hmm. And I hear what you're saying about the tech and the process, and I see it as well. And part of it is just, I think, letting go, because it is creative. And a lot of people, that might be uncomfortable for them because they're so, especially sales engineers, and they're taught to troubleshoot, right? And they're just very left brain thinkers. And we're saying, okay, now shift to your right brain and be imaginative and creative. And like, that's foreign to people. And I can tell you when I was in corporate sales for 20 years like that, I wouldn't have thought of that because I was that very straight-laced girl. And now I'm like, I am Disney. I'm like animated and I'm vulnerable and I'm doing all these things, but it took a while to do that. And so what you're saying, I'm hearing, is that resonance with your audience. And I would say, that's huge for B2B, especially what you said about Disneyfying it. Like, think about, Gartner, the 11 people making a decision now. How can you disarm and gain consensus and just even bring some of those 11 down to a level where they're ready to engage? You've actually got their attention. You're not going to probably get all of them, but wouldn't storytelling like really cross off a lot of those boxes?
And absolutely. And take a step back and think about those 11. Who are you talking to? So let's say you're selling an accounting product. So you've got the accounting team, you got your CFO, you might have your CEO involved. But who are those other influencers? So if we're talking about accounting tech to an accountant, that's not the best example because that might be a little bit more straightforward. But the idea being that if you had to talk to someone in marketing now, or someone in sales, or someone in customer success, or someone in HR, that it ties to that product or service that you're selling, how do you create that vivid imagery? And I think that's really the key, is when we talk about technical details, we get bogged down in the technical aspects, the nuts and bolts and grease and grime of it. But the reality is that if we can create vivid imagery, you're much more likely to remember that story yourself as the prospect, but you're also much more likely to retell that story to the other people of influence that are making this decision for your company if you have a great story.
Mm-hmm. And I would also add to that your audience will be able to reshare that story because they'll remember it, right?
Exactly.
And so, two things struck me there is, when I think about neuroscience here, and the brain's job is, it loves visuals and pictures, right? But our brain's job is to predict, and when you can share a picture of it, you're helping it do that. You're making it easy, but also the limbic part of the brain that makes the decisions, it has no concept for language. So you're painting a picture, and logic goes out the door, and data and all that stuff. And so there's so much science to say, like, stories sell, facts tell.
You're 100% right, and you nailed it. And I think what's really interesting there, if we're going to get into the neuroscience of it, I love this. I can geek out on this all day. So one of the things that's really interesting is if you've bought a new car in the last year and you were shopping around for a specific car, did you suddenly see that car everywhere on the road? 9 out of 10 people are going to say yes. And why do we do that? It's because we're overwhelmed with information that we tell our subconscious mind what our conscious mind needs to understand is important. So we suddenly see that car everywhere because now we're telling our subconscious mind that car is important. Mm-hmm. So we can talk about storytelling, but it's also how you deliver the story. And where I'm going with this is that most people talk in the same tone all the time at the same level. They're not messing with tempo. They're not playing around with pace. They're not playing around with when to pause. What happens is that the person listening, we talked about engagement and attention at the beginning of this, the person that's listening, they hear, their subconscious mind is saying, what I hear all the time is not important because it always sounds the same. So this doesn't stand out to me. But if you start playing with tempo, you talk a little bit fast sometimes, then you slow down to the point where it feels uncomfortable. Your prospect now, their subconscious is going to say, wait a minute, this is important. I'm not used to hearing this type of cadence. I better pay attention.
It's a pattern interrupt, and I love that. And I pause for effect all the time. And what I see is, especially, and this is where, I in person and now in virtual, and people are, well, you can't do them in both. And yeah, you absolutely can. And if you think about, 3 to 5 second pause, that's a normal delay in the virtual environment anyways. So it's just, I think that when we can really make it about our audience and remember for a moment that this might be the first time they're actually seeing this specification, that they're hearing something, and we're throwing the next one down. And it's like, let that sink in, like, just let that absorb, and 5 seconds, 7 seconds, and then throw it back to them and get their feedback. But when we're just barfing all over them and in a Bueller tone, like, what are you expecting?
So I love that. And I love what you did there. And I think what's really important to recognize is that that pause is so critical, but I'll actually say, I'll let that sink in for a second, and then I'll pause. And then the shock and awe in their reaction. But, all these ideas started to develop for me because when I first started sitting in on demos with no experience, having never given a demo, but just understanding engagement skills, I started sitting in on the first demos and realized that the prospects were off camera, or if they were, they're looking at a second camera. You can watch them clicking on. They're not focused. They're not. You haven't pulled them in. You haven't made a compelling of enough of a situation or argument to actually get them to focus on you and what you're talking about. So discovery is key to really diagnosing the problem, but telling a great story, I will argue, is as important, if not more important, because if they're not engaged, they're not going to get excited. But if you get them excited, you're more likely to build a champion. If you build a champion, you're more likely to get deal velocity through your sales process.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. And think about, a cold call. You got 7 seconds to get their attention. Like the demo is the same, like you said, the number one thing we're competing against is distractions.
Yes.
And it can be anything from like coffee, from like, right now, Uruguay and Portugal playing out in my living room. It's like the other person on the line has to grab your attention. And I see people going on and so just to bring it back to best practices, so this is tactical for my audience, is what kind of lighting, what kind of mood, how are you showing up? How are you inviting your audience to go, oh, like perk up and go, oh, this is different. Okay, you've got 20 minutes, you've got my attention. And when you're not intentional, you're not purposeful, you set the tone immediately and you invite your audience to go, this is going to be very like everyone else. I'm going to just go on LinkedIn a little bit here while they do this.
And you're controlling the meeting. People forget that. They think that the person who's graced me with their time is the one in charge of them. They're not. It's your meeting. Run it like a show, run it like theater. There's theater to this, right? So you set the tone, you set the pace, you decide they're going to match your tone. They're going to match your pace. It's all, again, we get into the neuroscience of it, but it's not hard to get people's attention. It's hard to figure out how to do it out of the gate. But if you do repetitions of it, and then another issue, and if you're a solopreneur and you don't have access to a conversation recording technology like a gong or a chorus, I would record myself. I'd have my phone off to the side and I would record some of my calls, some of my demos. And the first one you're going to watch, you're going to stop 3 seconds in because you're going to feel so uncomfortable watching yourself. But then the second time you do it, it's a little bit less unnerving. The next time, a little bit less from that, a little bit less, a little bit less. If you watch yourself 10 times in a row, you will be able to start self-coaching, right? You don't need me to come in and coach you. You can self-coach now by doing that repetition over and over of watching yourself. How was your pace? How was your tone? How was, when were they looking at your screen versus looking off, right? Little bits of data, but you can pull it all together and it's very effective.
Game tape doesn't lie.
Game tape doesn't lie.
And what I think there is, and so I say, watch yourself with the volume off, because then you're looking at your body language and your hand gestures, and that's 55% of it, right? And even what I also say is call coaching is huge, and I think it's that willingness to get better when you can watch yourself. And like you said, the first one's going to be cringeworthy, and then you get over yourself. But watch your audience. Watch when they're leaning in. And I think it's important to know, what am I doing? What am I saying? What is my tonality that's inviting them to do that? Because so many people are leaving up to chance. They loved it. Well, what did you do? How can you repeat it if you are unaware and you can't pinpoint it back to what you're doing? Because then you're more predictable and it's repeatable. And so I think it's incumbent upon the sales leader to really coach them and show them, model the behavior. This is what good looks like. Give them a video, and then it shows them. It's like a puppet. When I do this, they do that, and it's just this human behavior. You're watching mirror neurons. You're watching when you say something, what they're doing when they're leaning in and when they're leaning out. You're like, okay, I lost them. I went on too long there. That was a monologue. How can I turn that into a best practice? Guys, at 2 minutes too long. Check in with them.
I love it. And I want to double down on that, because you said 55% of it's body language, and I can't agree more. And I learned that because I was on stage on a cruise ship pitching these products. So I had to keep people engaged for 60 minutes. It's the first sea day. I'm competing against the sun on the top deck. It's at lunchtime. I'm competing against the buffet. I'm competing against much sexier departments than duty free, like the spa and the casino. So I started to realize the more engaged and almost, caricature of myself, and I'm not saying to go that far in a business meeting, but again, I'm on a stage now. But the more that I leaned in, the more that my facial expressions and my gestures, the more I talk to my hands or use my hands to highlight points, the more effective, the less leakage I had out of the store or out of the theater. that I was doing that in. And it's the same thing here, right? And I'm watching your body language, and you're raising your shoulders and you're leaning in and you're using your hands subtly. Those are all very key and they are very effective. But most people stand there like this. They talk like this and they sit there like this. And what questions can I answer? What can I show you about my product?
And you know what? In their defense, they don't know any different, right? When I started, I remember watching videos and I was like that. I was like doll hands. You didn't even see anything. And I'm like, what? And now, you have to be careful too. Sometimes I'm too much hands. But what I always say is that we have to reverse engineer it. And I always go the KFD, like work backwards of what do you want them to know? What do you want them to feel? What do you want them to do? And so when you can set that intentionally, you're not leaving it up to chance. When I want them to know this, therefore I have to do this. I want them to feel this. So when I can say these, when I can tell the story, and this is where, it is a craft and you have to pause. It's like a good joke. If you throw the punchline in too early or you don't pause enough or you have to explain it, it's not a good joke, right? So how can you do that in your demos?
There's a parallel to stand-up comedy and giving a demo because it's about timing.
Yes.
So much of it is building up to. So when we were getting people excited on a cruise ship about a certain type of product, we would build and build and build and build to a reveal. And that reveal was now they were excited about that. And it's the same thing if you're giving a demo. If you're about to show a really cool part of your product, something really interesting, you build and build and build to the aha moment.
But that takes practice, but it also takes letting go and detaching, and also just that pause that makes them want it, right? And you're making it about them, going, if I can just withhold for 1 second, like the outcome and the result and the reciproc is it's so much better because you've just waited. But so often we can't, and we just drop it. I'm like, you just didn't play that card well, and that was such a powerful card. So timing is huge, and I think people don't think about that. They're like, we're not in theater, but when you break it down and when you can share what you did, and you were competing with huge things, but they came to you. So there was those things do work, is what it's showing.
Oh, there's no question it works, and that's I have over 10,000 hours on a stage, and I can't teach all of that body language technique I learned. Like, for example, I geek out on this. My messaging, because my crowd was 85% American, but it was from all over the US. So it was from Denver, Detroit, Dallas. Someone from New York is a very different buyer than someone from California, especially in a B2C environment. But because I had all this time logging this body language and the reaction to it, I started to lean in unintentionally to what the whole crowd resonated towards, as opposed to just one section of it. So it's just interesting how the more practice you have and the more you do it and the more you actually watch your body language, you can start to tailor how you deliver to be a more universal opportunity.
And would you say, Nick, that there's some nuances you had to pull to really connect the New Yorkers with the Californians, or was it you could just find that common denominator that would get everybody?
I think if I could, the Californians were very easy to get excited, but if I got the New Yorkers on board, right? If I got them on board. So, but it was interesting, a mix of sometimes I'd have to be a little bit more aggressive because that would appeal to, someone from Manhattan. I'm just talking from personal experience. But then sometimes I'd be a lot softer and more laid back, and that would appeal to the California. And I think what's interesting is that it's just having that range. Think of yourself like an actor, right? If you can have that range, sometimes you have to play this type of character, sometimes you have to play that type of character. But what I will tell you is your company or you go to all the effort to get something inbound, someone interested in what you're offering. And if you're a solopreneur, how many of those do you get a year? 5, 10, 15, really, truly. And then now the bullets are flying for real. Now you're on stage. You're presenting to the person who you want to pull the trigger and buy from you, right? What is the dollar value to that 1 hour presentation that you're going to give then? Because what's that client worth? If that client's worth 10 grand, how much time are you preparing for that? How much time are you prepping and practicing and making notes of what worked and what didn't work for that particular persona? Something to think about.
Yeah, no, completely. And I would say a lot of people aren't putting in the time. And I can tell you, doing keynotes, like the amount of work goes in is crazy. But that's where, for me, that's where the confidence comes in that I know my stuff. I don't want to be over rehearsed because I also know that's an issue. But I feel that when you can rehearse, you can also be free. And when you're free, you can connect, you can engage with your audience. You can almost anticipate those needs, but you can read them because you're not focusing on you, and you can look outward and be like, Nick's not, I'm kind of losing him a little bit now. Oh, he's nodding here. I'm getting to see a little bit about these New Yorkers on this side. You know, when I do this, they do this. And I think when we're too focused on ourselves, our message, because we haven't done the work, we can't see these things. We can't read the unspoken, all this stuff that, that holds people back.
Well, let's dig into that, because the other problem that I see all the time outside of discovery and presentation skills is we always make it about us. It's our solution, our product. Here's the time or money or whatever we can save you. It's not about you. Your client's the hero of the journey, right? So it's about them. It's about their pain point. It's about, hey, listen, if I could really give you back 5 hours a week, how would you spend that? Would you spend that with your family? Would you, what does that look like? Get them to start thinking. But I think that's often missed.
Well, even when you say, the thing I laugh about most is most companies, they claim that they're so buyer centric. And then they start a demo and they say, we are the number one this, we are end to end this is our logo, these are the people. And I'm like, really? You've spoken the first 5 minutes about how great you are, and your customer their eyes are rolled back. So yeah, kudos to you for being buyer centric.
You nailed it. You're so right. But it's because we get caught up. It's like, when I started doing a lot of work in the tech space was with a lot of technical founders, because they would get so technical because they were geeking out on their own product. But as the end user, is the tech, what problem is the tech solving? Is it solving a marketing problem? Because then the end user is maybe not going to geek out on the tech unless it's just a cool concept, right? So really understanding that and really talking to the prospect and, like I said, make it about them, keep them engaged. And, it goes back to what I said a couple minutes ago. Like, what is the dollar value of that contract or that plane actually landing? Right. So put the time in, put the effort in, because to me, this is you've got them this close. Right. And think about that. If you're a solopreneur or you're an AE, what percentage get to the demo and then buy versus don't buy? Right. Because again, all that time you put into getting to the demo. So I think if you take a step back and actually look at that from a 30,000 foot view, it might give you some insight into, should I put more time into practicing my demos and how I present and how I tell the story about my company or my service?
So if you take that, Nick, and we back it up a little bit and say, look, we're controlling the demo, it's all about focusing on our audience. What are you seeing the best AEs or reps do starting a demo? Like, what's the best practices to actually open a demo up?
So when I first came out of B2C, so business to consumer, and I got into B2B, my first B2B demo, I was shocked and floored. And the second one again, and the third one again, because I'm like, where's the rapport building? Where's the opportunity to just have like you and I, before we started recording this podcast, I grew up in Toronto, you're in Toronto, start talking about Toronto. That's interesting, right? We start to build rapport with each other. Like, we lived in the same neighborhood in Toronto, right? So rapport is being built. And I think people are so ready to jump into the sales demo that they miss that opportunity. But people buy from people they like, and people like people who like them. So if I'm going to give you a demo or a presentation, I'm going to look through your LinkedIn and not just at the superficial stuff. Oh, you're in Toronto. How's the weather? But what I'm going to look at is, where'd you go to school? Maybe we went to the same college. Maybe, there's something that you felt so important about in your professional accreditation that you put it in there. Hey, Karen, I noticed that you took the 3-day contract negotiation course that Harvard offers online. What was the best thing you learned from that? Like, what's the key takeaway from that? I'm looking at something like that, right? So there's all this gold. I remember one time I was speaking to someone who in there had an accreditation to be a youth hockey coach. Who puts that in their LinkedIn? But man, in the first 60 seconds that I happened to bring up hockey, we talked about hockey for 20 minutes, 5 minutes of a real quick demo, and then 5 minutes of what are next steps. So I think if you can find, I'm not saying you have to do that, but I'm saying for the 90 seconds that it takes to go through someone's LinkedIn profile, or really understanding their business or their space or what they do, is worth the effort. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you haven't done a discovery call, you want to do a really thorough demo. But if you have done a discovery call, or maybe there's 3 people on the call, you've only done discovery with one of them, I would recap the pain points to make sure that I'm actually talking about the right thing that all 3 stakeholders want to talk about, not just what the first person kind of lobbed me a softball about.
Mm-hmm. So rapport and discovery or recap for the other folks who perhaps weren't on the call.
And I think the rapport, sorry, Karen, I'll double down on this again. I'm not saying to use it every time. I might use it 1 out of 5 times.
Yeah.
But again, the 90 seconds of doing the legwork, I'll do every time, because for that 1 out of 5 times that it hits, it's so valuable. One of the most influential people in my career the last couple of years, we first met and I went through our common connections on LinkedIn, which seems, I mean, Karen, you and I probably have like hundreds, right? But I go through that. Mm-hmm. And I saw my brother-in-law on there. So within the first 30 seconds, I'm like, hey, do you know my brother-in-law? And she's like, oh my God, he's great. I love him. I worked with him at so-and-so. I worked with him for 5 years. Cool. He's nothing like me. But all the good things about him, she superimposed on me now as we opened up that conversation. Yeah. Completely different conversation than if we didn't have that connection.
And it just shows connection is what you said. It's because I think people get on there and it's just robotic. And if you, even if you've done 90 seconds, you have that card to play. And I think the theme here is know your audience. Are they the type that want to get right into business? Then follow suit. But, feel them out, be okay to dance in the moment. And that's one thing I see is people can't. They're so lost without a script and they can't fill the silence. And it's just like, almost forget that it's a demo and just think you're out for lunch with a friend. Like, and there's that awkward dating silence. Like, bring up something that, to fill the silence. And that's just being you. And I think a lot of the times we put so much pressure on ourselves and it's just like, how can we bring it down and, and just neutralize it? But I feel that rapport building does that because it also shows, this person's a little different. They took a minute and recognized that I was a youth hockey coach, because if I put youth hockey coach down, guess what? I'm very passionate about that. And how much can you draw from that? I mean, you can go anywhere on that.
Absolutely. And I think that's the opportunity that people miss because they're just not thinking that way. I want to go back to one more thing that you mentioned a couple minutes ago. And I think another point that's really interesting is once you've established all that, how do you actually deliver it? And you were talking, if you memorize something, it sounds very robotic. So when I was selling on cruise ships, we were selling basically, 60 minutes of content for time. So brands were paying like literally by the second. So we had to have them represented every time. So what I would do is I would have my sellers memorize that 60 minutes, up, down, left, right. And I would tell them, like, your national anthem. Can you just, if I gave you a certain part of your national anthem, can you pick up the next line? You need to be able to do your presentation the same way. But if you have it so memorized, then you're not thinking what's next. Then you can add some of the body language. Then you can add some of the, okay, I should pause now, because you know it so well. So I think it's important. I really believe until you have it so memorized that it just flows without thinking about it, that is something that I would focus on, because it gives you that initial credibility. But if you can get to that next level of now adding these other elements, it just makes the meat of what you're selling that much more effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good points. So I'm just going to kind of follow. So if you talk about the opening, I think it's very important, the ability to connect with them. What about purpose? I think now, we're exchanging value for time, and time is it's worth, it's a fleeting resource. So it's like, how can you let people know immediately, like, this was a good use of your time. This is what we're going to accomplish. This is the goal. How important is it for people to share that at the beginning of the call?
Well, I think it goes back to recapping discovery. And the reason being is that I fully understand your pain point. You have a pain. You are exchanging your time right now for my value proposition, which is I'm going to solve that pain. So I think the best way to do it, or how I would do it, is I would really make sure I understand, okay, I want to, we talked about this, or as a group, whatever, we talked about this. I want to make sure that those are still the current issues that you're facing. Right? Mm-hmm. One, it gives you the opportunity to unpack. Maybe there's more. Maybe there's a new stakeholder who's on who can go deeper into one of those elements. And maybe it's not. Maybe it's like, no, you got it covered. But at least they're aware now that I've put in the time to understand what their issues are and how I can offer a solution. Maybe I have one, maybe I don't. But I think it's so important to kind of recap the discussion. And it can be 15 seconds, 30 seconds, but just make sure you're striking the right chord.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think that just gets, especially if there's new players coming on, you have a baseline now that there was two not on the last call. When we're all at the same starting point, we can now move forward and have an engaging conversation where all stakeholders can participate. And I feel that's taking control. And a lot of people don't do that. They just jump off. And the other people may not say, hey, Nick, can you kind of recap they'll just check out, right? So it's incumbent upon us to take control and let people know where we were, where we are, and where we're going.
And, I can tell you from my own experience, when I was solopreneuring, which I did off and on, over the last couple decades, where I would blow a deal is if I had, and again, I'm thinking from a solopreneur's perspective, where I would blow a deal is I've been talking to Karen. I understand Karen's pain. Great. I've had 3 meetings with Karen. Karen wants to buy, hey, just meet my partner.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't go through all these steps that I've now learned that are normal or best practices in the B2B space. So that's where I would drop the ball. I've got the CEO who's the idea person, who's the creative thinker, who's bought into my strategy. Now I got to talk to the CFO, who's actually the one stroking the check. And I handled it wrong almost every single time. And it bothered me for a long time because I couldn't figure out. I was like, maybe I just resonate, but I wasn't handling the personas right, because in this type of selling I was in B2C in the Caribbean duty-free market, the other person was the spouse, right? So it was a much different, and because it was so B2C, and we're selling jewelry, so it's like, it's a luxury. You don't need it. It was a romantic play. It was a anniversary play. It was, it was a different kind of persona, but only later did I connect those dots of why I had failed when I had failed previously as a solopreneur.
Multi-threading.
Multi-threading
is key.
Multi-threading.
But great awareness, Nick, to even lean in and go, why am I not doing that? Versus so many people who aren't taking ownership of when they are dropping the ball and saying, oh, it was them or they didn't have budget. Hang on a minute. Where did I play a role here? Where can I do something different? And I think that's also on us. We got to own our wins and our losses.
And I think if we don't step back and look at why we lost, you're just going to keep making the same mistakes over and over, right? Actually, one of the scariest things I ever did, and I've been on stage a lot, other than the first time I got on stage on a cruise ship, which is another story for another day. One of the things that terrified me the most, and I've been on stage a lot, was when I first got into tech and I took a VP of sales job, and I'd never given a demo, not of a technical product. So what I did was I put a post on LinkedIn and I said, hey, who wants to come and critique and rip apart my demo? It's my first go at it. 40 people showed up. 70% of the feedback I got was amazing. 30% I either knew or maybe didn't agree with, or they didn't fully understand the product, but it gave me a lot of learning opportunities. But what was the key takeaway? Step and the ledge will appear. I stepped and was putting myself out there and getting honest feedback from this crowdsourced LinkedIn community, right? And I thought that was really interesting, and it was scary, and people were like, man, you're brave for doing that. But I learned so much from that, and it catapulted me, right? So if you're a solopreneur or, go pitch your product to someone else, not someone who loves you, not your partner, not your kids, but find someone, a mentor, someone in the space who will give you honest, real, unvarnished feedback. You don't have to take it, but at least they might point out a few things here or there that are at least interesting and worth considering.
100%. I mean, and that takes vulnerability, right? But it shows the desire to improve. And I think we always, as salespeople, we're always learning, we're always growing, we're always developing. And it's the only way, because the way we perceive ourselves is different than the way we're perceived by others. And the only way to know that is ask others. Yeah. Okay, so we're moving into the middle of the demo. What I see is a lot of people say, this is our feature here, this is our feature, and it almost comes into an in-service, and we're still selling. We're not training, we're not implementing the product yet. They haven't bought it. And so what are your thoughts on really, or are you seeing reps really tie it back to that pain point that they shared in that recap as to why we're here in the first place, and then even turning it back to the customer or the product to articulate the value?
You just nailed it. I have no response to that. That's exactly what you should be doing, right? Just getting a temperature check. That's the best way to think. Are we on the right track? Are we sailing to the right destination, Karen? Right? And if we're not, let me pull it back. Or I'm sorry, actually, that's not what you wanted to see. But we do feature jump. We do feature dump. But again, if you can tell stories that strike the chord of the pain, and then, hey, if you do sign up with us and take on our solution, what is that outcome? What is that going to look like on the other side for you? And, keep doing that. I mean, people want to understand that they're being heard, right? You can't say that too many times. You can't say, hey, are we on the right track here? Again, does this tie back? I want to make sure that I'm valuing your time here. Is this, again, the issue? So yeah, tie it back. You see it better than I could. So I'm just going to sit here and be quiet.
And even on that, when people don't, and I had Matt Dixon on here the other day, and there was slight nuances where it was like, yeah, I think so, versus I got it. And there's that a little bit of doubt, and the best performers, the top performers are saying, I'm just going to pause there for Nick. Do you need me to go back, or I'm just, are you unclear as to, what this is doing or something like that? Because there's doubt there. And I think when we skim over that, that's where we get the ghosting and all this stuff, because there's something there that needs unpacking. But when we're so inwardly focused, we're missing. And that's a slight nuance, because it's like, yep, got it. And you're like, nah, yeah, kind of. And you could just see there's a bit of hesitation. And a lot of people are afraid to dig into that.
And it goes back to what I said earlier. It's your meeting, right? So if you decide that you want to circle back and make sure your guest is comfortable, and that's how I always looked at it. And I'll draw a parallel doing a demo to working on a cruise ship. I was a hotelier first. If someone is giving me their time to come into my demo for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever it is, they're like a guest in my house. I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to feel relaxed. Can I get you a beverage? Do you want water? Do you want sparkling water? You look comfortable on the couch? Would you like some pillows? Is my dog bothering you? Right? And I know that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but that's how I approach it. You are a guest in my house. You showed up into my Zoom window. It's my house, because I'm controlling this meeting. The minute I lose control of the meeting, you're not buying from me. So I'm in control, but it's my house, and I want you to feel comfortable. Part of the reason I'm going to make sure you're comfortable is by circling back and making sure you don't need those pillows fluffed up.
Yeah. And I think it's even, just to build on that, is you're curious. You're just like, it's not like I'm cornering you and I'm making it uncomfortable for you. I'm kind of confused, right? I just really want to make sure, because you want to really solve this. And if this isn't going to work, then maybe we're not a good provider for you. And I think when you can provide context, that transparency and that others focused, they'll open up right away and say, you know what, Karen, yeah, I don't know if this is, or whatever the issue is, or it might be nothing, but you're just showing that you're trying to ultimately help them get to their end result. If it's not with me, that's okay too, but let's uncover that now versus keep on going.
I can't tell you how many times I was not the right fit, and I said, I'm not the right fit for you for X, Y, Z. And that same person who did not sign with me wound up referring someone else to me.
Always. It's just the law of reciprocity as well. It's like, you were so honest and trustworthy. Like, I want to reward that. If I can't work together now, and it might be an NRN, not right now, but I'm also going to tell somebody, because I want to repay and honor that transparency and that honesty.
Absolutely. And look, we're building relationships, right? Every person that comes into my house or my demo, I've already connected with them on LinkedIn. So now they're seeing my content. Now they're seeing et cetera, right? And it goes back to what I said earlier about the rapport building. Hey, Karen, nice to meet you. Just connected with you on LinkedIn. By the way, I noticed, right? Because I want every person who's a little bit interested following me on LinkedIn, right? And that's another conversation for another day, but you should absolutely be leveraging content and LinkedIn to grow your brand, to get more of these demos. Yeah. So increase your close rate on demos and increase your hold rate on meetings.
But what you said there, Nick, is if you want them to follow you, you have to make it about them. And that's the irony. People think, oh, you want to follow me, so I'm going to tell you how good I am. No. I want to talk about you. I want to make you look good. I want to make you feel good. It's all the feelings from you, not from me.
Give value.
By doing that, then they'll follow you. Yeah.
So, quick cruise ship story. This is one of the ways they used to give value to cruise ship guests. So if you get on the ship the first day, the craziest place is the lobby with the line for guest services. 200 people deep who've been traveling all day on a plane and now get to the ship and they want to go see the ship. They don't want to be in line. So all hands on deck except me. I was a Department of one person. So you have the hotel director, the food and beverage director, all these other people. They're trying to solve problems. They didn't want to be there. So what I did was I would work the line and I would say, hey, not guest services, but can I just find out what your question is? Just make sure you're in the right line. Half the people were in the wrong line. And of those people, I could direct almost all of them to that 2-minute line over there or that 5-minute line over there. They were just in the wrong line. Never said what I did, never promoted, come to my presentation, but they would be, you're so helpful. Thank you. Thank you. Look at my name, but what do you do? Tell me what you do. Oh, we do the duty-free shopping. Actually, we have a really cool presentation tomorrow. You should come. 60, 70% of those people that I solved that problem for came to the presentation.
Mm-hmm. And they also probably said, you must be Canadian.
No, but I did get that a lot. You're from Canada, eh? Everyone's so nice in Canada, eh? Yeah, 100%.
But think about that deposit, no ask. And what I would say there, Nick, is most salespeople now start with that, hey, I'm doing a presentation tomorrow at 1:00. And they miss, or they've made it about themselves. But you delivered no ask. And they remembered you for that because you were others focused. I'm sure there was compelling reasons in your energy, your engagement. And that they said after, like, again, that reciprocity. People want to reward that. You help me, I help you. I'll come, sure.
And when you've been giving value nonstop, when someone then walks into your sphere and now we're in your Zoom, it's a much different conversation. They're the one who's excited. They're the one who's like, thank you for your time, right? Flips the dynamic, totally. 100%. So I know we're talking demos, but creating content, creating social proof, creating visibility, creating awareness. Brand awareness is so important, whatever you're selling, whether you're a solopreneur or you're selling a product, creating awareness is critical for success.
But it is related because if you think about, the buyer's journey, like the demo is part of it. But if they're unaware of the problems they're having first or unaware of how to find you once they do come to that awareness, it all leads eventually to showing you how your solution can help solve their problem.
And I'll also tell you, I don't know if most of your listeners are based in Canada or if you have a global audience, but I will tell you as a Canadian, when I first moved down to the US, it took me a while to learn how to sell to Americans because they want to be marketed to. They want to be pitched. It's part of the culture. Whereas in Canada, I had to be your friend for 6 months before we could even talk business, right? So I think that there's something for Canadian. No, but it's true. Tell me I'm wrong. So I think it's something for Canadians to really be aware of is that get up on that soapbox. Tell people, not about what you do, but what kind of value that you can bring to them. And don't be afraid to do it. And the Canadians I've seen who've had the most success kind of in the US are not afraid to get on that soapbox and wave their flag. So,
and it's just, again, storytelling, but sharing outcomes. People are buying outcomes. How can you help them achieve this? How can you show them how you've helped others like them? They want to jump on that bandwagon.
But I have the same problem as that case study.
Yeah. That's what you want. That's resonance, right? I mean, think about even as us as consumers. I can tell, and when people, I'm like, man, you got me there. Like, and I'm like, what was it? I'm like, oh, you played the tired mom card, or you did, and I can see it, right? But it works.
Fantastic.
One last thing, because I know we're at the top of the hour here. Closing it out. How are, again, next steps oftentimes missed, but again, we're controlling it. And so often what I see is, well, what do you think we should do? How do we, and again, they're not professional buyers. They're an expert in their field. So I see that relinquish at the very end and I'm like, no, take them home. So what should people be doing at the end of the demo to really get that momentum and the advancement we're looking for?
Is this what you're looking for? Do you, again, paint the picture of, hey, listen, if you did, sign up today, and we onboarded you, do you feel that these problems could be solved? And if you can't get, and I never do the presumptive ask or assume that they're going to buy from me and be like, so when can we sign you up? Although I've tried that a few times in my career. But I think what's important is a great leave behind, right? So how do I now summarize in a PDF or a quick recap video of what we discussed? So one time I sent a proposal recap into a prospect. I had 40 individual users and I sent it with a Loom so I could tell how many unique users saw it. I went viral in their office and I got that sale, right?
Yeah.
So what are you giving them to, what's the cherry on top, right? What's the dessert to the meal? And I think a really good leave behind, a strategic leave behind, again, persona-based if possible. And then a quick recap video. Hey, Karen, just real quick, 15 seconds. Just want to make sure we covered everything today. So we talked about this, this, and this. Here's what you said. Fantastic. We're here for next steps. That's it.
And the beauty of that, Nick, is that the reach it has, and like you said, because I use Vidyard, and when I send it out to one person, I see 40 people. But when you get on that next call, Beth, who I've never met, is like, "Hey, Karen," and she thinks she knows me because she's seen the video. So there's that human to human connection. It's, the second best to being in person.
I've been at events where I've had a line of people like waiting to talk to me because they've seen the content, and they're like, "I need to talk to you about Demostack. I need to talk to you about Demostack. I need to talk to you about Demostack."
And I want to buy a Cartier watch.
Let's go watch shopping.
I know. My little Apple needs updating. Okay, so thank you so much. I feel like we're rushing out because we're at the top of the hour. But just first of all, congratulations on Social with Jen and Will. I'm delighted, and we'll have to hear more about that. You have to come back. That's all I have to say.
Anytime.
This was
Anytime.
a rushed, just an overloading of value.
I'm going to have to get you on my show. Go to market this week.
All right. Well, let's do that. I was a flight attendant, so I worked in the air, not on the sea. So I have some stories as well. But just quickly, people are going to say, "My God, I want to buy a watch, and I also want to learn how to improve my demo." So where can they find you, Nick?
So what I'd suggest is if you found this content today helpful, any of these tips or tricks, follow Demostack on LinkedIn. That's most of what I do is create, actionable insights that people can actually go and deploy same day. So Demostack, and then follow me on LinkedIn as well and say, hey, especially if you're from Canada. And if you come through Phoenix, let me know, bring Timbits.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks so much, Nick, and we'll see you next time.